They fined me $200 for encroaching on a driveway I paved myself 15 years ago, then showed up with a tape measure and a smirk. I watched their clipboard tremble when I slid a deed packet across the gate, the one with my surveyor's seal dated 1998. Welcome to my channel. I'm David Hall, a civil engineer out of Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, and this story's about what happens when an HOA forgets who actually owns the ground they stand on. If you're new here, I tell real stories about property rights and community accountability, so subscribe if that's your lane. Where are you watching from? Drop your city below. I'm curious how far HOA headaches reach. It started last spring, right after my wife passed. Her garden, 6 raised cedar beds behind the garage, was the only place that still smelled like her. She used to hum while pruning the lavender. The scent still hung in the air when the first letter came. Violation, unapproved gate. They said the wrought iron arch I'd installed 20 years ago visually disrupted neighborhood harmony. I thought it was a mistake until 2 board members arrived with clipboards, pointing at my driveway like surveyors at a crime scene. The president, Greg Harkins, was a stocky man with mirrored sunglasses. "Sir, this portion here, about 4 feet, extends into HOA-managed common easement. You'll need to remove or relocate the gate within 10 days. His tone was all policy, no humanity. I told him the gate was anchored inside my parcel line, that I'd staked and poured the posts myself. He shrugged, handed me a bright yellow notice and said, "The board's interpretation is final." I could have ignored it, but something about the way he smirked, like he already saw the fine printed in the ledger, lit a slow fuse in me. I spent that night at my drafting table, brushing dust off my old survey maps. The original plat of Lake Alder Estates, recorded 1985, clearly marked my lot's boundary extending 3 feet past where they claimed the easement began. I traced it twice under the desk lamp, the paper crisp and dry-smelling, like history refusing to bend. Still, I didn't rush. HOAs thrive on impatience. I documented everything: photos, measurements, timestamps. Knowledge nugget number 1. Under Idaho's Common Interest Ownership Act, a board can't redefine recorded property lines without a 2/3 supermajority of lot owners and county approval. They had neither. The next week, I attended their open meeting. 10 residents, lukewarm coffee, fluorescent buzz. When my turn came, I held up my survey map. "This is my line. The county assessor confirmed it yesterday." Greg leaned back, fingers steepled. "We'll review that with our counsel," he said. Then to the room. "In the meantime, Mr. Hall's gate remains non-compliant." Murmurs rippled. I caught my neighbor Janice's eyes. She was new, retired teacher, kind soul. She mouthed, "Unbelievable." Outside afterward, she caught up with me. "Don't let them scare you," she said, adjusting her wool scarf. "They fined my son for parking his kayak rack too close to the fence. You'd think they own the lake." That line stuck. Own the lake. Because behind my lot, the driveway curved to a narrow strip of sand touching the water, once a shared launch point before the HOA fenced it off. My wife had called it the town's heartbeat. Losing her had already felt like losing half that heartbeat. Now they were choking the rest. So I began to dig deeper, not just into maps, but minutes, budgets, and filings. County recorder's office, building department, even the HOA's own public disclosures. The smell of toner and dust followed me through those halls like a silent ally. By Friday, I had a file box labeled Alder Boundary. Inside, plat maps, title chain printouts, and 2 memos suggesting the HOA had never formally accepted the easement they claimed to manage. When I told Janice, she blinked hard. "So, if they never accepted it, then they're trespassing every time they step on it," I finished. She laughed, a dry little chuckle that turned into a cough. "I'd pay to see you tell Greg that." I smiled, sliding the box onto my passenger seat. "Not yet," I said. "Timing is everything." The next violation came 3 days later. Unauthorized lighting, remove path lamps, or pay $100 per day. I had 4 low-voltage LEDs along the gravel path, installed for safety after Janice tripped one night. I left them on. That evening, I poured coffee into my thermos, opened a clean legal pad, and wrote one line across the top. Strategy equals leverage before confrontation. The plan started with a thermos of coffee, a quiet Sunday, and a trip to the county surveyor's office before dawn. I parked before the blinds opened, engine ticking in the cold. When the clerk arrived, Mary, badge lanyard twisted, I greeted her with the kind of politeness you save for people who can hand you truth on paper. I need the official topographic overlay for Parcel 47B, Lake Alder Estates, including easement acceptance documents, if any. She typed, brows furrowed. Strange, she murmured. No record of acceptance by the HOA. Just the original developer's note. Common area not conveyed. That means it's still private unless a later filing exists, which it doesn't, I said. Thank you. She smiled, slid the stamped printouts across the counter. The ink was still warm when I tucked them into my binder. Proof was a smell too. Toner, starch, victory, just shy of arrogance. 2 days later, the HOA doubled down. A new notice. Unauthorized use of common property. Driveway access suspension. They attached a fine schedule totaling $3,400 if non-compliance persists. I laughed out loud reading it, then caught myself, because they always bet on emotional reaction. I copied the letter, sealed it in a labeled envelope, and dropped it into my growing evidence box. That evening, Janice joined me on the porch. They're calling you stubborn, she said. Greg told folks you're holding up community beautification. Beautification, I repeated. Is that what they call expropriation now? She chuckled, sipping tea. He's got a lawyer friend whispering in his ear. Some people just love the sound of their own rules. I looked at the lake, mist curling like breath over glass water. They forget we all paid for this view. The next morning, a white truck with the HOA logo parked at my gate. 2 officers stepped out, measuring tape snapping in the wind. I filmed from the porch, zooming in on the clipboard, timestamp 9:12 a.m. They marked spots, took photos, and left a red tag zip-tied to my gate latch. Final warning. That night, I scanned every document, stored digital copies on a hard drive, then sent them to my attorney friend, Ben Kessler, a real estate specialist with ink-stained cuffs and a habit of quoting statutes like scripture. They're bluffing, he said over the phone. But bluffing can still cost you if you react wrong. Keep your tone calm, no profanity. Every response certified mail only. Certified mail, I echoed, writing it down. Knowledge nugget number 2, he said dryly. Under 33-31-313, any HOA notice disputing property boundaries must attach a survey by a licensed professional. They haven't. So every notice they send is procedurally defective. That line felt like a loaded chamber. 2 days later, another envelope arrived, this one hand-delivered by Greg himself. He wore aviators even in the shade. Mr. Hall, the board voted unanimously. You have until Friday to remove the gate or face legal action. I held up my phone. Just to note, this conversation is being recorded for accuracy. Idaho's one-party consent law applies. His jaw tightened. We'll see what the judge says. You will, I said. He stalked off, gravel crunching under his boots. I looked down at the paper, same boilerplate language, new date. They didn't even change the typo in encroachment. By Thursday, my plan had matured. I'd confirmed through title abstracts that the developer's mortgage had included the access lane, and that the note had been foreclosed, reassigned, and purchased by a private trust 2 years ago. That trust? Aldershore Holdings, LLC. Its registered agent, me. Reversal number 1 was now in motion, though no one knew yet. I quietly owned the common area they kept citing. Still, patience mattered. I let them hang themselves. Midweek, I mailed one final response. Pending review of title and survey discrepancies, no action will be taken. Any unauthorized entry will constitute trespass under Idaho Code 4018-7008. Friday came. Greg arrived with 2 men and a chainsaw in the truck bed. I stepped outside, voice calm. Touch that gate, and you're cutting into my property. You'll want to call your counsel before you commit. He hesitated. The chainsaw hummed, idle. Then he waved them off. We'll handle this through proper channels. He drove away without looking back. I could almost feel the anxiety ripple through their board that night. Early next morning, Janice brought muffins, eyes bright. You stopped them cold, she said. What now? Now, I said, sliding a folder marked Phase 2 onto the table, we give them a meeting they'll never forget. If you've ever gone toe-to-toe with an HOA, tell me below, are you firmly anti-HOA, or have you seen one do real good? And if you've faced something like this, share one tactic that helped you stand up. It might save a neighbor's sanity. Ben called that evening. You sure you're ready to play this long game? Ben, I buried my wife under this sky. I'm not leaving the driveway she loved to a committee with clipboards. He paused. Then document everything, because when they retaliate, and they will, you'll need to show intent. And retaliate, they did. 3 citations in a week. Improper trash placement. Mailbox color deviation. Excessive decorative lighting. The last one made me laugh. My porch bulb had burned out. I took photos, labeled each with date and GPS. The digital folder grew heavy. My printer hummed like a metronome of defiance. The printer's rhythm was almost soothing until the knock came, 3 sharp raps, the kind meant to sound official. I opened the door to find a county code inspector holding a clipboard. Behind him, Greg leaned against his SUV, arms crossed, pretending not to watch. Mr. Hall, the inspector said, we've received reports of non-compliant lighting and refuse storage visible from the roadway. I stepped aside. You're welcome to look. Bring your camera. He blinked, surprised by the invitation, then walked the perimeter while I followed, recording quietly. When he finished, he muttered, everything seems within code. I signed his form, shook his hand, and made sure the lens caught Greg's face when I said, thanks for confirming I'm in compliance. That night, I sat at my desk and printed the inspection report. Another sheet for the binder. Tab 7, labeled Third-Party Verifications. Every page was building a wall they couldn't scale. Still, the constant intrusions chipped away at my patience. I'd come home to tire tracks near my gate, new chalk marks on the curb. Once, a stranger in a reflective vest took photos of my backyard from the shoulder road. When I stepped outside, he vanished into a silver sedan with no plates. I started keeping a logbook. Time, date, event, witness if possible. Janice joked I should charge admission to the Chronicles of HOA Madness. But humor only carried so far. One night, I found a letter slipped under my door. Withdraw your complaints or expect escalation. No signature, just block print letters. I smelled the faint tang of copier ink. Office machine brand, not home. Greg's company used the same kind at their office. I didn't show fear, but I did add a motion light and a small camera aimed at the driveway. The lens blinked once every 10 seconds, a heartbeat of quiet vigilance. Ben came over the next morning, coffee in hand, suit jaws, jacket folded over his arm. You're being targeted, he said, scanning the files. This isn't just annoyance, it's harassment. Keep documenting, but don't take the bait. He flipped through the binder and smiled faintly. You've built a stronger case file than most attorneys. We spread the papers across my kitchen table, maps, notices, photos. The smell of toner mixed with the coffee steam, heavy and sterile. Knowledge nugget number 3, Ben said. Selective enforcement doctrine. If they enforce one rule against you but ignore it for others, it's legally voidable. Find comparables. So I did. I walked the neighborhood under the pretense of photographing architecture ideas, snapping shots of identical mailbox colors, trash cans left out, string lights identical to mine. By dusk, I had 42 photos, each time-stamped. Janice looked through them on my porch. That's at least half the street, she said. Exactly, I said. Uniform rule-breaking equals selective enforcement. When I sent the file to Ben, he whistled through his teeth. This'll sting. Don't drop it yet. Wait till the board meeting. They'll dig their own grave trying to defend this. I spent that week quiet, compliant, polite. The HOA's email blasts grew sharper. Some residents continued to disregard community standards. My name wasn't there, but everyone knew. Friday morning, I got a letter from their legal counsel, a 2-page threat about liens, foreclosure rights, and potential trespass if I accessed the shared road. That phrase made me laugh out loud. I owned the road, they just didn't know it yet. That night, I added a sticky note to my plan. Reversal number 1 reveal equals HOA open meeting. Janice baked cookies for morale, she said, and asked, You really think they'll push it that far? Janice, I said, men like Greg only stop when there's an audience. As I prepared the exhibits, surveys, deeds, the LLC transfer certificate, I imagined the expression he'd wear when the truth came out. But under the satisfaction, another feeling pulsed: fear. The night before the meeting, I woke to the sound of gravel shifting outside. I peeked through the blinds. A flashlight beam flicked across the gate, 2 silhouettes. Then the sound of metal on metal, the gate latch being tested. I stepped onto the porch and flipped the light. Hey! They froze, then ran. I caught enough of one profile to recognize the HOA treasurer, Dale, his bald head glinting under the lamp. By morning, I'd filed a trespass report with the county sheriff. The deputy, a tall man with sunburned cheeks, nodded as he took notes. "You've got video of it?" "2 angles." "Good. They crossed that line again. Call dispatch. You're within your rights." Hearing that felt like air in my lungs again. Later that day, I uploaded the video to a private folder labeled Set Piece Evidence. I wasn't just defending myself anymore, I was setting precedent for every homeowner they'd bullied. And that's when I realized something. My fight wasn't only about boundaries. It was about restoring balance to a place that had forgotten it was a community, not a fiefdom. So let's stir a real debate here. Where's the line between keeping order and controlling people? How far should an HOA go before it stops being about standards and starts being about power? Drop your thoughts below. By the time the next meeting rolled around, I was ready. I'd rehearsed the sequence, checked the law, even called the county records clerk to confirm every page. The folder sat on the passenger seat beside me, buckled in like a co-pilot. The meeting hall smelled like old carpet and burnt coffee. Rows of folding chairs creaked as neighbors shuffled in, murmuring about fines, landscaping, and someone's unapproved shed color. Greg stood at the podium, chest puffed out in that way small men do when they mistake a microphone for authority. "Next item," he said, rapping the gavel. "Property dispute, Lot 47B. His eyes flicked toward me like crosshairs. "Mr. Hall continues to obstruct a shared access road and remains out of compliance. The board recommends daily penalties until removal." I rose slowly, folder under my arm. "Before you vote," I said, "I'd like to enter some documents into the record." He sighed. "You had your chance to appeal." "This isn't an appeal, it's clarification." I stepped forward, slid the first sheet across the table, the 1998 survey with my engineer's stamp. "Boundary line," I said, tapping the ink. "Confirmed by County Assessor, April 12, 2023. Then the next, a copy of the foreclosure deed, the assignment to Aldershore Holdings LLC, and finally the ownership certificate listing me as managing member. "For the record," I said, "the HOA does not own the access road. Aldershore Holdings does. That's me." The room went quiet enough to hear the clock tick. Greg's smile faltered. "That's absurd. The common areas were conveyed when the developer dissolved." I nodded toward Ben, who was sitting 2 rows back. He stood, adjusting his glasses. "Actually, they weren't. I verified with the recorder's office. There's no conveyance document, meaning the HOA's jurisdiction ends at the platted boundary." The treasurer, Dale, the same one I'd caught trespassing, shifted uncomfortably. Someone in the back muttered, "Wait, so the road's his?" "Yes," I said, "and I've allowed access freely for 15 years. But last month, your officers entered my property and threatened to destroy my GI. That's not administration, that's trespass." I slid the USB drive across the table. Video evidence, time-stamped and confirmed by the sheriff's department. The projector flickered as the footage played. 2 men at the gate, one with bolt cutters in hand. Gasps rippled through the room. Greg slammed the gavel. "This isn't admissible. This is intimidation." "No," I said calmly. "It's documentation. You taught me that with every citation you mailed." He leaned into the mic, voice tight. "You think owning a strip of asphalt makes you untouchable?" "Not untouchable," I said. "Just law-abiding." Ben handed over a single sheet, a sheriff's confirmation of the trespass report number. The deputy himself had signed it. The sight of that blue ink sent a visible chill through the board. I let the silence stretch. The weight of truth always lands loudest when nobody dares breathe. "Effective immediately," I said. "Any unauthorized HOA entry onto Lot 47B will be considered trespass and referred to law enforcement. However," I paused, I'm not here to shut out my neighbors. I'm here to stop the abuse." Some heads nodded. Even Janice from the second row whispered, "About time." Greg's voice cracked like a brittle branch. "You can't speak for the community." "I just did," I said. The meeting adjourned in chaos. Half the room left whispering my name like a warning, the other half like a prayer. Outside, under the parking lot lights, Ben clapped my shoulder. "You dropped the hammer." "Only the first swing," I said. He smiled. "Reversal number 1 executed." We loaded the documents back into my truck. The night air was cold, metallic, almost sweet. Somewhere across the lake, a loon called, echoing through the dark like punctuation. Over the weekend, word spread fast. Emails leaked, residents compared notes, and by Monday, Greg's confident newsletters sounded more desperate. Phrases like misunderstanding, temporary miscommunication, and in review sprinkled through every line. Still, I knew pride wouldn't die quietly. He'd regroup, find a new angle. That's why I began Phase 3, digging into the HOA's own compliance. The state's database was a labyrinth of filings, but patience is the weapon of every engineer. By midnight Tuesday, I'd unearthed something sharp, a lapse in their annual registration. The HOA had failed to renew its corporate status 2 months prior, meaning, legally, the entity didn't exist. Knowledge. Nugget number 4. In Idaho, a lapsed corporate HOA loses standing to enforce liens, collect dues, or issue fines until reinstated. Every action they'd taken since that lapse was voidable. I sat back in my chair, the glow of the monitor catching the rim of my coffee mug. "Game over," I whispered. Still, this wasn't about humiliation, it was about correction. I wanted a system that wouldn't repeat this, one where power came with accountability. So here's a question for anyone listening. When an HOA crosses a line, should the law force automatic audits, or should residents have to fight for each inch like this? Where's the safety net? Drop your thoughts below. Some legislators read these comments more than you think, or at least like the video if you believe oversight should be built in. The next board notice came printed on plain white paper, no letterhead. Special meeting, Wednesday 6 p.m. to address community concerns. Ben called it the capitulation session. I called it Act 2. We agreed to bring, not anger, but order. My file boxes, labeled property, violations, evidence, statutes, lined the hallway like soldiers. As I locked my front door, Janice waved from across the street. "Bring them truth, David. Truth," I said, "and a pen." When I arrived at the special meeting, the parking lot was already full. Pickup trucks, sedans, even a local news van with its antenna half raised. Word travels fast when a board starts to crack. The rain had come early, slicking the asphalt and making every headlight smear into silver streaks. Inside, the atmosphere buzzed. The folding chairs were gone, replaced by a semicircle of tables for community dialogue. Greg was there, of course, jaw set, hair slicked back like a man trying to preserve control through grooming alone. Dale avoided my eyes completely. Ben leaned in. "Stay calm. They're baiting you for anger." I nodded. "Not tonight." Greg opened with forced civility. "Mr. Hall, we acknowledge receipt of your evidence and ownership documents. The board regrets any misunderstanding." "Stop," I said gently. "Don't call this a misunderstanding. Call it what it is. Mismanagement." A ripple ran through the room. The reporter adjusted her mic, sensing blood in the water. Greg's voice rose. "This is a volunteer organization. We're neighbors trying to maintain property values. You think your paperwork gives you the right to humiliate us?" "No," I said. "Your paperwork, or lack of it, did that for you." The audience murmured. Some residents clapped softly. One older man, Mr. Kramer, raised his hand. "Greg, you fined me last month for parking in front of my own mailbox. Do I get a refund if you weren't legally a corporation?" That hit harder than anything I could have said. Greg sputtered. "That's not how it works." Ben stepped forward. "Actually, that's exactly how it works. Any action taken while your corporate status was inactive can be rescinded, and funds collected under that period are subject to restitution." The room gasped. That's when the power flickered, literal and metaphorical. Greg's voice cracked. "We'll reinstate immediately. No harm done." I leaned forward. You can't reinstate trust by filing paperwork. You need reform." He laughed bitterly. "You want to run for president, David? Is that it?" "No," I said. "I want accountability, transparency, term limits, open voting, public audits." A woman near the back, Marta, a single mom with 2 kids who played by the lake, stood up. "He's right. We've been bullied for years. Let's vote for reforms." Greg banged the gavel. "Out of order." But the momentum was shifting. You could feel it in the rhythm of voices, the way whispers became sentences. That's when retaliation went from bureaucratic to personal. The next morning, I woke to find my mailbox ripped from the ground, posts splintered, letters scattered in the mud. One envelope, half soaked, bore the words, "Stop digging." I called the sheriff. The same deputy came, shaking his head. "Persistent bunch," he said. "Want me to dust for prints?" "Please," I said, though I knew Greg wouldn't be foolish enough to leave any. Janice brought over coffee, her eyes worried. "They're trying to break you down." "I know," I said, picking up the splintered post. "But every nail they pull just exposes more rot." That night, I wrote my final presentation, the one that would seal this thing shut. Not vengeance, but justice. I'd built a case stronger than most civil suits. Video evidence, official filings, tax records, and now, thanks to a tip from a friend at the county clerk's office, emails between Greg and the landscaping vendor hinting at kickbacks disguised as maintenance bonuses. The smell of burnt paper filled the kitchen as I printed the last of it. The ink cartridge groaned, paper feed clicking rhythmically. I added a final line to my notes. Goal equals restore trust, not destroy people. Then I closed the binder, pressing the cover down until the rings clicked shut. Outside, the wind rose off the lake, pushing ripples toward my dock. I could see my reflection in the water, fractured by motion but steady underneath. Ben called. "You ready for the set piece?" "Yeah," I said. "Tomorrow, 6 p.m. They'll bring the cops this time, thinking it'll scare me. But that's exactly what I need, a neutral authority to witness everything." He paused. "Then this is it. Be precise, calm, and undeniable. Always." And here's a thought for everyone following this story. When rules meant to protect become tools to control, what's the right response? Compliance, resistance, or reform from within? What would you do if your own HOA turned weaponized? Tell me below. By dawn, I'd triple-checked every document, numbered tabs, marked highlights. When the sun broke over the lake, it painted gold on the iron gate, the same gate that started it all. I locked the binder under my arm, exhaled once and whispered, "Let's finish this." The rain stopped just before the meeting, leaving everything slick and cold. The fluorescent light above the community center door flickered like a dying pulse as I walked in, binder in hand. Inside, the air smelled of damp carpet, burnt coffee, and nervous sweat. An old civic perfume. Greg was already at the head table, flanked by 2 officers in uniform. Neutral authority, exactly as I'd predicted. The deputy from before gave me a subtle nod. He knew this wasn't a circus. It was verification. "Mr. Hall," Greg said, loud enough for the crowd, "this is a formal hearing to resolve your violations and to address your recent claims regarding ownership." I placed my binder on the table with a solid thud. "Then let's resolve everything tonight." He smirked. "Proceed." I started slowly, calm, controlled. This board has issued 14 citations against me in 62 days, totaling $5,800 in fines. Under Idaho Code 553208, such penalties require a valid corporate entity to administer them. Your HOA, I flipped a page, has been administratively dissolved since April 17th. That's 114 days of acting without authority. Murmurs erupted. Someone whispered, "Is that true?" Greg turned red. "That's an administrative oversight, nothing more?" "An oversight," I interrupted, "that voids every enforcement action and exposes the signatories to personal liability." I handed the deputy a printed copy of the state's business entity record, stamped with the Secretary of State's seal. He examined it, then nodded. "This checks out." Silence. The kind that fills every corner of a room when truth lands too heavy to deny. Then came the next blow. "Further," I said, sliding forward a manila envelope, "I have copies of vendor correspondence showing board members approved personal payments from landscaping contracts under maintenance stipends. That's not beautification. It's kickback." Gasps. The reporter's camera clicked once, twice. Greg lunged forward, face flushed. "That's slander!" Ben's voice cut through. "It's evidence. We've verified the routing numbers through the county vendor registry. And for the record, this information was obtained through public channels, fully lawful." The deputy stepped forward, resting a hand on Greg's shoulder. "You'll want to stay seated, sir." That visual, the HOA president frozen under the hand of law, was the moment I'd built toward for months. Visual beat number 1, the binder open, documents spread like a battlefield map, the gavel idle, the crowd hushed. Greg stammered. "You don't understand how much work we do. We protect property values." "No," I said quietly. "You protect control. There's a difference." The deputy straightened. "At this point, the county's compliance office will need copies of all this documentation. I'll file an incident report tonight." The room exhaled collectively. Some looked relieved, others frightened. Dale rubbed his temples, muttering, "We're finished." I didn't smile. I just closed the binder. "No, you're not finished. Not if you're willing to rebuild." The meeting adjourned without ceremony. Outside, the cold hit like honesty. Rainwater still clung to the asphalt. My boots left prints I didn't bother to hide. Ben joined me by the truck. "You know they'll try to settle privately," he said. "I won't settle for silence," I replied. "Not this time." He nodded, tucking his thermos under his arm. "Then you'd better prepare for the domino effect." And he was right. The next 48 hours were chaos in motion. Board resignations hit inboxes like falling dominoes. The treasurer quit first, citing stress. 2 other members followed by Dawn. Greg tried to hold on, but once the insurer caught wind of the potential fraud claim, coverage was suspended. No insurance, no board. Emails poured in from neighbors. Half apologies, half thank yous. Janice brought over a homemade pie and said softly, "You did it, David." "Not yet," I said. "We still need reform, not just collapse." Still that night I stood by the lake and watched the HOA sign, the one Greg had installed declaring, "Private members only," tilt in the wind and crash into the mud. I took a photo, the sound of the shutter cutting through the dark like punctuation, proof that empires of arrogance eventually fold under their own weight. Before I turned in, I typed a note to myself, "Leverage now spent, time to rebuild." And for anyone following along, when the powerful stumble, what's the next right move? Mercy, exposure, or reform? Which one actually heals a neighborhood? Drop your take below. By the time the county investigation opened, the air around Lake Alder felt different, lighter but charged, like static before a summer storm. Greg had lawyered up, the remaining board members were silent, and neighbors who used to avoid eye contact now waved from their driveways. Still, I knew the final act wasn't over. The law doesn't end with exposure. It ends with accountability. The sheriff's office requested full statements. Ben helped draft mine, precise, factual, without spite. I submitted video, correspondence, and copies of every certified letter. The deputy who'd witnessed the meeting filed his own affidavit confirming what he'd seen, an HOA acting beyond its authority, in violation of both state statute and its own bylaws. The local reporter ran a short piece. Homeowner proves HOA overreach, county launches audit. It spread faster than wildfire in Dry Pine. The comment sections filled with people sharing their own stories, driveway disputes, mailbox citations, petty tyrannies disguised as community care. Janice came by with a stack of clippings. "You're some kind of folk hero now," she said, half amused, half worried. "I don't want to be a hero," I said. "I just want peace." But peace, I'd learned, has to be built, paper by paper, clause by clause. Within a week, the county compliance inspector visited every property in the subdivision. He knocked on my door, clipboard in hand, polite but firm. "We're verifying ownership records and maintenance funds for HOA-managed assets. You'll see us around." "Good," I said. "Maybe sunlight will disinfect what shade kept alive." Later that day, I walked down to the lake. The water was calm, reflecting clouds like slow-moving witnesses. I thought of my wife then, her laugh, the way she'd said this community was worth fixing, not fleeing. I whispered her name, and for a moment, it felt like she answered in the what? End. The next evening, a public hearing was scheduled to address the audit's findings. Ben called it the cleanup session, but I called it closure. The community center overflowed. Folding chairs pressed shoulder to shoulder. The inspector stood at the front, rain beating on his jacket. Beside him sat the deputy, the same one who'd nodded at me during the earlier meeting. Neutral authority, exactly as the law prescribes. The inspector began reading. Our review finds multiple violations of state nonprofit law, including unregistered operation, misuse of funds, and unauthorized property access. Effective immediately, the HOA's authority is suspended pending reformation. A murmur surged through the crowd. Someone clapped once, awkwardly, then others followed. Greg sat stiff as stone, jaw tight, staring straight ahead. I stepped forward. I'd like to make a proposal. The inspector gestured for quiet. The community deserves structure, not chaos, I said. So here's my offer. I'll relinquish private control of the access road on one condition, that we establish a new charter with 3 binding reforms. 1. Board term limits of 2 years. 2. Open financial audits published quarterly. And 3. Independent oversight for all citations. Greg scoffed. You can't dictate our rules. Ben raised an eyebrow. Actually, he can, because he owns the road your HOA claims to manage. Without his cooperation, your community access dissolves. This is leverage, not dictatorship. The inspector looked at me. Mr. Hall, you're offering to restore access voluntarily? Yes, I said, but under transparency. We all live here. We should all be able to see the books. The deputy nodded. Seems fair. Greg slammed his palm on the table. This is blackmail. No, I said softly. It's accountability. The vote was called right there. Hands rose, slowly at first, then more confidently. By the count of 31-3, the motion passed. Greg's face turned a dull shade of crimson. The inspector wrote something on his clipboard, then looked up. Effective tonight, Lake Alder Estates will enter reformation under community supervision. That moment felt like oxygen after months underwater. Ben grinned. Janice squeezed my arm. Even the deputy smiled faintly, tucking his pen into his pocket. Visual beat number 2. Rain misted against the windows, the inspector's gavel striking the table once, echoing through the room like a verdict. Afterward, as people filed out, Greg approached me. For the first time, his voice was small. You humiliated me. No, I said. I exposed the truth. Humiliation's just truth seen too late. He looked like he wanted to argue, but there was nothing left to say. He left without another word. Outside, the air smelled of wet cedar and new beginnings. Neighbors stopped to thank me, some embarrassed, some relieved. I just nodded. We did this together, I said, and meant it. But in the quiet that followed, I knew the story wasn't finished. Exposure wasn't the end. Reform was. And that would take one more turn, one more reversal to make the victory mean something beyond myself. And for you watching, tell me this. When corruption breaks in plain sight, is forgiveness earned or negotiated? Can communities heal after betrayal, or do they always remember the scars? Drop your answer below. The ink on the Reformation Charter dried 2 weeks later under a sky so clear it felt scripted. The signatures, mine, Janice's, Marta's, and the county inspector's, stretched across the page like a bridge over old fractures. For the first time in months, the sound of a hammer somewhere in the neighborhood didn't trigger suspicion. It sounded like renewal. Greg had resigned officially. His replacement, a soft-spoken CPA named Lauren, visited me with a folder and an apology. I read everything, she said quietly. You shouldn't have had to fight this hard for honesty. I didn't fight for honesty, I said. I fought for a system that makes honesty easier than corruption. She nodded. We'll publish the first audit next quarter, and the term limits are already filed. That was reversal number 2, the reform deal realized. My leverage traded not for money or pride, but for a new structure that couldn't be twisted by ego. Ben dropped by the same evening, thermos in hand, still in his office shirt. You know, he said, most folks stop at revenge. You aimed for repair. That's rarer than gold. Maybe, I said, but revenge only feeds the fire. Reform puts it out. He laughed, rubbing the ink off his fingers. You and your metaphors. Down by the lake, the HOA's old private property sign had been replaced with a new one, community access, Lake Alder residents welcome. Janice stood there watching kids skip stones, her scarf fluttering like a flag of truce. The first open meeting under the new charter drew nearly every resident. The mood was cautious but hopeful, neighbors bringing cookies instead of citations. The treasurer's seat stayed empty for a symbolic reason. No one wanted that kind of power anymore. When it was my turn to speak, I kept it short. This lake doesn't belong to me or to a board. It belongs to everyone who respects it. Let's keep it that way. Applause C. Calm slow, then steady. Outside afterward, Lauren handed me a copy of the signed charter. The paper still smelled faintly of ink and rain. "You'll want to frame it," she said. "I'll keep it in a binder," I replied. "That's where truth lives." Weeks passed. Life softened. The harassment stopped. Fines were refunded. And for the first time since my wife's passing, I planted new lavender by the garden she'd loved. The air filled with that same scent. Fresh, humble, forgiving. I kept her old mug on the porch rail. Sometimes, when the breeze was right, it tilted just slightly, as if someone invisible was picking it up. I liked to think she was still listening. Visual beat number 3. A folded violation notice curling in the flame of a fire pit, the reflection of the lake shimmering in the glass of my back door as the paper turned to ash. And for those still watching, if you believe I fought the right way and this is how it should end, say a few words in the comments for your friend. Subscribe so future stories reach you first. Share this so someone else learns they don't have to bend when the rules are wrong. That's on us. In the months that followed, state regulators used our case as a model for HOA reform training. 3 board members from other associations resigned preemptively. A year later, Lake Alder hosted its first community day. Free kayaks, kids laughing, barbecue smoke curling above the water. That's what changed after. And as for me, well, let's just say I've started collecting stories from other neighborhoods now. There's always another gate, another deed, another line someone forgot to read. I keep my thermos full, my pen sharp, and one phrase ready for the next battle. Show me the map.